Ay, ay, ay. Siesta Ocho, that's the music, and this is City Business with James Moore. We have Jason Strong in the house and Michael Halley joining us to give us an update on what's going down at City Hall. He was there last night, and there were going on, and so we'll go from there. Sorry, I have my short glasses on, so my mind's not going past the glass. Speaking of which, Michael Halley, how you doing today? Good to see you.
Good to see you. Glad to be here.
What you got on the docket?
All right. Here's an informal review of our regular city council meeting from January 22nd, 2018. We had 3 reports, annual reports, oftentimes in January is when we get them. So we heard first from our police chief, the police department annual report. I'd say the good news is that overall the crime stats are mostly holding steady. The only highlight was a rise in warrants. So warrants are someone's broken the law and law enforcement's trying to find them to serve them and charge them for the crime. And so the increase was, let me find it here. Last year, 138. Mm-hmm. Sorry, the year before. So 2016, 138. In 2017, 251. So quite a big difference. And over the last 9 years or 7 years, 8 years, that's the highest it's ever been for warrants. So Police Chief Thomas did speak on that. He said it's actually not just a local trend, but a national trend that criminals will enter a new state or a new area, commit the crimes, and then when the heat is on, they leave. And so it's kind of this transient criminal activity, and that the resources necessary to try to track them down once they've left the city or the state can be not worth following up, but he wants to be able to have somebody to follow up. So a lot of times they just can't find these people.
What's the number from the year before?
Year before was 138, and that's 2016, compared to 136 in 2015, 147 in 2014, and then as low as 45 in 2009. And it just increased, but then made this relatively large jump to 251 in 2017.
That's significant. Yeah.
It is significant. It's more than 1.5 times. So again, we're not sure.
Is it broken down by warrants, or what kind of warrants, or that's a different?
Yeah, I mean, they could probably get that info.
Oh, it's not in this report.
You can see in the report, and this is actually public info for anybody who wants to get it. So it's just a 1-pager. Mm-hmm. And also the Fairfield Ledger just printed an article covering this as well. But the types of crime are broken down. So assaults are down slightly. Domestic assaults up slightly.
And by the way, these are not related to the warrants. This is just the crime.
So these are the crimes. Sexual assault down quite a bit, 18 last year to 10 this year. Mm-hmm. Burglary looks like it was slightly up, but not much. Theft up a little, and vandalism up a little. So, 57 to 72, from last year. This is nothing to write home about. Controlled substances was down, and that may be just that they were thinking of why some of these would be the way they are in terms of the internals. Well, the police were lucky. The police department was lucky to have no turnover for a number of years. Mm-hmm. So they had trained officers, experienced officers, and then they had a lot of turnover and had to get a lot of new officers trained. And so when they're at academy instead of on duty, or they're just new, they don't get out and make the drug bust as much. But I know that was one of the priorities for the police department, was to do less calls for bats in the attic and more investigations and trying to limit the hard drugs that are here in Fairfield. We have opioids, we have meth. Yeah, we have all that. So again, there's really not anything on here that was a real eye opener, but just to tie this with something that is out in the public now as well is the police department noticed that the driving accidents were up a bit. And they looked into ways that other cities have dealt with that. And one is to adopt what's called civil infraction as a city code So currently, if someone breaks a misdemeanor traffic violation, so not having a child buckled or running a stop sign, the police have a choice to either issue a verbal warning, no ticket, or issue a state citation because they're breaking a state law. Well, those state citations include court fees and other fees that make them usually over $100, $100 to $200. Civil infractions means they would be breaking a city code and the fee would be much less. So $40 is pretty typical. Also, that infraction doesn't go on their driving record. So it's somewhere between the two. So I kind of think of it as, you're unruly in school. You either get kind of a verbal warning from the teacher or suspension. Mm-hmm. But what about detention? What about somewhere in the middle?
Are you saying the state does put that when it's a state infraction and ticketing that does go on your record?
Yes.
Oh, it does? Okay.
Yeah. So right now, it's either you get a pretty decent fine and it goes on your record, or you get a verbal warning and no in between. So cities like Ottumwa, Iowa City, and others have adopted civil infractions that just make, again, it's misdemeanor traffic violations. Gotcha. So the smallest crime level misdemeanor, and only for traffic violations, they adopt that as part of the city code. So then the police have that option. So in some cases, just to be fair, they would issue the $40 fine instead of a verbal warning. So they have that as an option. But in other cases, they would issue the $40 instead of the 100 plus. So,
and is it their choice? In other words, the state law still stays in place?
Exactly.
Okay.
So someone mentioned, well, what if someone's a repeat offender and all they do is just get this $40 and it never goes on their license? Well, if the police can check the record and see they will charge them with the state so that it is going on the record.
And one other question, I don't know if you know the answer to this. When it's a state ticket like that, does some of that money come to the city too?
Small portion.
So it's probably about this, I don't know what it is.
No,
but
actually, quite a bit more would stay in the city.
I see.
So we ran the projections. So currently, say, for the same number of tickets, under this current system, about 3,000 comes back to the city. With this new, so same number of tickets, but smaller fines, 30,000 would stay with the city. So, it's not chump change, but in city's budget, that's
okay.
That's kind of a drop in the bucket. But so fines to individuals could be lower. Not talking about ticketing more, but the revenue to the city would stay. Now the state, anybody who works in city government is aware that the state has been making decisions and putting in policies that have made funding to cities less.
Right.
They did a cutback on commercial property tax that no one was asking for, but they said 15% off the top. And then, so that's less revenue for the states or for the cities. The state promised they'd backfill it, but they're poised to renege on that. And so there's just less funding for city government. That's just that simple. So this is a way to reverse that trend a little bit. It's not about making more money by giving more tickets, but the same number of tickets in many cases would be smaller fines and not on people's records, but also the money stays local, where it goes in the general fund and can be used for police department, fire department,
gotcha,
rec, library, that kind of thing. So that's a little bit of an aside, but it's worth mentioning just because you might be hearing about that in the news. But it's always nice to hear from our police chief and see, because they use these statistics to guide what they're going to focus on for the coming year. So if they realize we need to get back out on the drug bust, they'll focus on that. If they realize one thing that was way down was actually traffic stops. I should take a look at that. It was significant. Traffic stops went from 1,900 to 1,400. And again, they said, and before that, in 2015, it was up to 2,400.
Wow.
So many fewer traffic stops, again, because they were training officers, and part of that time the officers aren't here. They're in Des Moines. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. The next report was the library. All good news in terms of they're doing really well and they're keeping their materials up to date. They have a policy where they bring in new and then get rid of old so they don't get overdone. It's a much more of an emphasis on downloadable material and audiobooks and such. So it's interesting that the Library of the Future may not even have a physical paper book. It's becoming,
like the money of the future.
Yeah, exactly. So the one thing was that Rebecca Johnson said that they really would like to have IT tech support. And they had that position for a while, and then the budget didn't allow it to continue. But I talked to our city administrator, Aaron Koiker, about it, and it could, if the budget allowed, become a full-time city position where this person could work for all departments, and that would actually cost less than hiring a contractor
for each.
Mm-hmm. So would love to see that. This next fiscal year, it looks like our revenues are down, and so from assessed values, so we have to tighten the belt a bit to balance the budget. So it won't be happening for fiscal year 18-19, but perhaps 19-20. It's just nice to think about these things.
Yeah.
And if, like our city engineer, if it becomes obvious that hiring that person does have a cost savings benefit, then I don't want to use the word no-brainer. It becomes the obvious choice.
Yeah.
Trying to avoid cliches.
Easier choice.
Yeah. The third report was Beautification Commission.
Oh, yeah.
And really, they just do amazing work and really focusing on the downtown. They've done painting. They've done things that you might not notice, like getting new tops for some of the trash can. But when they're gone, things just don't look as tidy and quite as nice. And so they're just really focusing on even the nodes downtown, getting volunteers for that. And it's a decent job. I took care of 4 of them, and my girlfriend really got annoyed. We'd take a walk. I said, let's walk downtown. So go downtown, and next thing I know, I'm digging through my node, pulling out trash. But when they did a really clever thing. They put the name of the person or business who was in charge of that node.
So if it's messy, then
everyone knows, hey, Michael Halley's not keeping his node clean. So it was a great idea. It was
well, it's also giving credit for people that are taking that responsibility on too, which is it's a nice thing,
Yeah, and
community space.
What they found is that the park department is good about the nodes around Central Park, but when you cross the street, those are the ones that really need volunteers. And I feel good doing it, and you're just literally picking up trash. It's not a difficult task.
Are you watering and that kind of stuff too?
No, they took care of that. They took watering, mulching, and I would pull weeds as well, not just in my nodes and others, but my father was a landscape architect, and I used to pull weeds for him as a teenager, and I just get the satisfaction when I get it by the root.
Nice. Oh, I know.
So I'm a little addicted to that feeling when I get it and I pull it with the root. It just feels really good. So,
by the way, we're speaking with Michael Halley. This is James Moore. You're listening to City Biz, a report from City Hall after each City Hall session. Mondays, we come the next day, lunchtime, 12:30. Also will be rebroadcast dinner time Thursday at 6:30 p.m. and the following Monday morning breakfast time, 6:30 a.m. FMC is in the house with Jason Strong. If you're seeing this in 3D, I believe they call that newfangled thing. If you're listening in 2D radio, or is it 1D? I'm not even sure how many Ds we got here. But we are back to the docket with Michael Halley.
All right. So most of our resolutions and action items were regarding various property development. So, for example, rezoning 800 North 12th. There's a house that burned down, and then someone came and put a new house there, and they want to change it from agricultural to residential, R2, which makes sense. And then the city approved a letter of support for the new Chicago housing project I talked about.
Right.
That would be
the old St. Mary's.
Yep, that project. And so when we file these letters of support, we're not promising anything other than what's already in existence in terms of our tax abatement. We're just writing the letter and then referencing our current incentives. So it's not a new incentive for them, but it helps them in their applications for some of these state. They're looking for the Workhouse Housing Tax Incentive Program. So those are very competitive, and any letters of support they get are helpful. Then we rezoned that block from B1 to PUD, Planned Unit Development. So that allows them to have mixed use, so some residential and some commercial. And little house cleaning. We had expanded the Park and Recreation Advisory Board from 5 to 7 members, but they have having trouble finding 7. So they said, can we just make it back to 5? So we're just amending the code to limit it to 5, which seems like the ideal number for them. And then this one, surprising in a sense, I thought there would be more public feedback. The fireworks, when the fireworks
People
are allowed to be
just
discharged.
didn't care, did they?
Most of the people we heard from said, yes, please limit it.
Right.
And what I expected were more people to say, no, don't. But of all the council members, only one heard that.
I think you'll hear that when it's closer to the actual thing.
Yeah, when they realize.
Is my prediction. But
but we tried to get it out in the paper.
I'm not saying you don't, but it's just one of those things that, hey, what?
Yeah, we talked about that before the show. Sometimes when something has happened is when people get... So we really want people to pay attention. It's going to be the third and final reading coming up February, checking the date, February 12th, 7 o'clock, City Hall. So if you want to have input on that, please contact your council representatives or somebody at the city to say, do you support limiting it to only the 4th of July and December 31st, which is what the ordinance would do. All right, we had one committee report. I'm now the chairperson of the Public Safety Transportation Committee. Never a dull moment. It's actually fun to be back on that committee because, like I said, it's always something. So let's see. A couple of things worth mentioning. Right-of-way parking. So the space essentially, more or less, it varies street to street, but the space between the sidewalk and the road, even though a property owner is responsible for maintaining that, it's usually grass. You have some trees in there, some bushes. That's the city's right-of-way. It's an area where the city can access buried utility lines and such. A growing number of residential drivers have been pulling up their vehicles and parking in that space. So they're popping the curb and they're parking in the grass. The problem with that is, in some areas, it's so close to an intersection that they're blocking sight lines so people can't actually see oncoming traffic. And so you're getting into a situation where public safety issue. Some local businesses are also parking in that area, but not putting down gravel or cement. They're just parking in the mud and then tracking that mud into city streets and making a big mess. So it's been on the city's radar. I remember talking with our former city administrator about it, and there's no easy answer because we don't want to disallow it like some cities because many commercial properties use that. They've got an area where it's paved and they've marked the parking stalls, but technically they're in the city right away. But we need some policy, for example, where the city didn't need to come in and dig to get to our buried utility lines. Whose responsibility is it to then put the cement back? Historically, the city has been doing that. So it's not that we wouldn't, but we just need to say, well, what's our policy? So we thought perhaps we just start with prohibiting parking in the right-of-way on what's called R1 or the first residential zone, which is typically single family. That really, for that, we don't want to see any parking in the right-of-way. Now, if it's multi-family housing, maybe
sometimes you need it,
but we would have certain requirements. The requirement would be that the curb has to be cut or ground rather than people popping it, to have a smooth entry, and there would have to be some sort of hard surface, but also an understanding that if the city did need to access buried utility lines, that may disrupt it. So it's a tricky one, but we're going to move forward and try to kind of figure it out as we go. What's interesting is the variety of policies that you'll see other cities in Iowa. Many of them just say, no, you cannot, which I assume then people need to get a variance to be allowed to. That seems a little heavy-handed in that direction. But when you have these people parking too close to intersections, we really need to do something. The mud in the street is less of an issue, but the blocking the sight lines is an issue. And then the final thing we talked about was the two-way traffic conversion downtown that's been discussed. So our city engineer, Melanie Carlson, made a few mock-ups of various ways that could be done. A couple of them included bike lanes. And then she talked to a colleague of hers who specializes in this a bit more. He said, well, if the bike lanes don't have an access beyond the square, which they wouldn't. The bike lanes would just be on 3 streets around Central Park. That's actually not a benefit to cyclists because they can essentially go in a circle, but they can't.
But stop on one.
Yeah, they can't get out. They can't get out from the other streets. They're too narrow for bike lanes. So the mock-up that we asked her to get a cost estimate for did not involve bike lanes, but it involved, currently there are 3 lanes. It involved converting the inner lane on Main, Broadway, and Court, so the lane closest to Central Park. That lane would actually then become the parking, and where the parking is would become part of the park. So Central Park would expand slightly, and we'd lose that interior lane, and the other 2 lanes would be two-way. So one
thing,
can't
handle change, Michael.
Yeah, well, we need to know what it costs before we can really talk about it. But one thing that would allow for is a nice wide sidewalk on the outside of Central Park. Currently, there's a very narrow one, and then as cars pull up, it becomes not even a sidewalk. So little things like that.
Well, I have a simple, just ban cars altogether. And then
it's funny, I had a gentleman from Denmark told me that it's a common policy now, or that people convert downtowns into no car zones. So I don't think our city's ready for that. So we'll look into this. But again, it's too many questions yet.
Let's just say it's not on the table.
It's not on the table. It's only on the table is let's investigate it. Is it viable? The final thing was our engineer, city engineer Melanie Carlson likes to give a project update, usually the second meeting of the month. Really not much to report because we're outside of construction season, though we had warm weather last week, and on Friday they were pouring the foundation at the wastewater plant for the influent pump station. I can't remember which exactly, but one of the many new constructions going on at our wastewater plant. Quite a big hole, I must say. They were pretty far down there, pouring all the cement. We had the good weather. Now we're getting into this funny one right now where it's freeze thaw all week, 50s and then 30s and then 20s at night. And so
it's Iowa, baby.
Yep. So it's not a lot going on. But one thing I thought was worth mentioning is for next summer, city departments have become more skilled at concrete work. And so they were able to, this is Public Works Department employees, they were able to reconstruct the alley across the street from City Hall, running east-west, and also the portion that runs next to India Cafe, in-house. So they did it all themselves, didn't need to contract anyone, and the city engineer provided the engineering services. So that's great. It means that we can do these projects, these smaller ones, in-house and save money. So they're going to do more downtown alleys next summer is the plan. And I think just keep going until they've gotten them all. So smoother alleyways, actually it would be, I see how everything ties together. It would be an important component were we to switch to two-way streets downtown, because currently deliveries like to come out and park in that middle lane, which isn't so much a problem when you can go around them. Or 2 lanes, we would ask them to deliver, as most cities do, behind the building, use the alleyways. There's some issues in some of them where they're so crowded with dumpsters and such that it's just, you know how it is. One thing affects another, and then, you know. It's
like a butterfly wing in Tanzania. Okay, I won't go that far. Is that it?
That's all I got.
I do have one question. I see Ed Malloy, the mayor, has thrown his hat in the ring for state senate, and as a Democrat. What happens if he wins that? What happens to the mayor position? Is it an appointment, or how does that work? Or does he step down? Does he do both? Do you know anything of that?
Yes, I can describe that. So were he to win the election in November, I would actually fill in as mayor pro tem. Mm-hmm. So I'm mayor pro tem, which just means if he can't make it to a meeting, I chair it. Right. And then we'll have a special election for just mayor, because he would then start his term as a state senator in January. So
there'd be a time.
There'd be a time, but I don't know how quickly that election could be organized. So if early November, obviously, is election day, and if you were to win then the city would get moving on the special election.
I see.
But yeah, it would be just for the mayor position.
So
would be interesting.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't think it's too much of a surprise for political watchers, but that I think information just came out today or yesterday. So.
Yeah, he announced yesterday, and then it's been covered in KTVO and the local paper and such. So
and KRUU
now.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Michael Halley.
FMC.
And FMC. Fairfield Media Center, fmc.com, right? If you want to check it out. Cool. Jason Strong in the house, looking strong. And this is James Moore. And thank you for joining us for this week. Get it? Strong week. Oh, man. Heady stuff here. Heady stuff. And that's why we're heading east. So thank you so much. We'll see you in a couple of weeks, God willing, and the creek don't dry. You are listening to City Business. Michael Halley. This is James Moore. KRUU-FM, people-powered radio right here in Fairfield, Iowa.